Hey, how's it going? If you're watching this video, you're probably in McFarland's lab and you're going to be studying the deposition of carbon on high temperature surfaces. So right here I just drew a diagram of how this experiment setup is going to look like. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to have a flow of methane and hydrogen through this flare right here, and we're going to be altering that ratio to study how that affects the carbon formation on this tungsten filament. Right here we have two copper rods that we attach electrodes to. In between we have a tungsten filament that when you apply a current through it, it gets hot, and that's what causes the pyrolysis of methane. And we have an inlet flow of our purge gas, nitrogen, also coming in, but that's not coming in with the flare. That's more coming in the side of the reactor. And so once we have that, we have it hooked up to an exhaust right here that I didn't draw, and we're going to be setting up a camera right around here just so we could see how the deposition of carbon forms and how when we alter that ratio, like at what ratio that occurs at. All right, let's get started with building it. Oops. All right. So now we can go to actually building the reactor. So what you'll need is the reactor head, which looks like this. It's got kind of this opening right here and three kind of inlet tubes. We have the reactor bottom, which fits kind of snug with the head. That should be fairly easy to find. We need a flare, this head piece, which will go like this, and this exhaust piece, which is going to go on the bottom of our reactor. We need quite a few swage lock fittings. We're going to need these two female to female ends. They look like this. They're metal, and you could put, let me see, you could put the swage locks, the reducers on them, and that's what we need them for. You'll need two copper rods and some tungsten wire. Usually I like using the 0.02 inches diameter one, but unfortunately we ran out of that, so we're going to be using the 0.03 for this video. Hopefully by the time you start working in the lab they have some more 0.02, just because it's a little easier to work with. So first what we're going to do is we're going to set up the top to our reactor head. So we're going to need one of these Kaijon fittings. We'll put the big side down and just tighten that up right now. We don't want any gas flowing through this, so we're going to need to cap it. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a swage lock, and there's these metal caps that they have that just block it off. So let's see, we put the big end, we put back ferrule, and the other ferrule, the front ferrule. And remember, it's always the ferrule should always kind of be pointing towards the reducer. So now we can just tighten that up with our fingers, get nice and snug. And put the cap on. So what we're going to be doing with this is we're going to grab our flare, put it through, and just like that. We don't need to tighten it yet because we don't know exactly how low we want the flare to be. So moving on, let's see. We got to keep it with this, and we want to be able to combine our gases, our hydrogen and methane, in this flare. But the problem is we can do that with mass flow controllers, but those only go up to very low flow rates, and we want to be focusing on some higher flow rates. So the way we're going to do that is just by using rotometers and connecting the gases with a T-joint. And if that's confusing right now, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about once we have it set up. So for the T-joint, same thing with the swage lock. We put the back nut on, back ferrule, front ferrule right here, and we just screw that on, make that nice and tight. So now we put our female to female end on here, and this is because when we connect the gas, we need to screw it. We need to screw it on, but the problem is those gas tubes we have are smaller diameters than this, so we need to reduce this somehow, and this is how we reduce it to a smaller diameter, and you'll see what I mean. So we got to make sure we have this reducer with the larger end and the smaller diameter right here. So we'll put that on here, and now we can connect our gas tubing here, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the other T-joint. Just screw the female to female end on, reduced, that's not the right one, reduced one. We have the larger end, the smaller end, so we put that here, just screw that on. Make it nice and tight so it's not moving it around anymore. So now we have the top of our reactor. So we can have a hydrogen flow over here and a methane flow over here that we can control individually. And that's going to be flowing through here. And we're going to have this right above our tungsten filament. So next what we got to do is we have to, oh, this came apart. Gotta make sure this is nice and snug. Yeah, that wasn't on. There we go. Better. So now what we gotta do is create our filament with the copper rods and our tungsten wire. Personally, I think this is the most tedious and most difficult, and it's probably gonna take you a little bit the first time, but it's okay. You'll get better. So what we do is, if there's any residual tungsten in these rods, just grab this clipper that's kind of sharp and chubby, and we're just going to cut off the ends. Throw that away. Same thing with this one. Cut off the end, throw it away. But now, I don't know if you can see, we kind of smushed it a little bit, and these copper rods are supposed to have a little center hole that we can slide the tungsten into. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these pliers, which are flatter, and they have these kind of dull, almost I would call them cutters right here. They're not going to cut through, but they're going to be able to help us mold it and get that hole back. So we just do this so we can see that hole. It's not focusing, but you can see that hole. And if you need, you can grab a push pin, make the hole a little wider just by sticking it in and twisting like this. I believe that should be good. Just widen that up a little bit. We'll do the same thing for this one. Open it up. There we go. I don't know if you can see that. My camera would focus. Same thing we'll do with the paper clip. You don't always need to do the paper clip if you get it good the first time, but usually I do. Okay, so now that we got this, we're going to move on to making our tungsten wire. So what you want to do is kind of, you're going to put your copper in here just so we can gauge how much tungsten we're actually going to need. It's just a little bit of a guess, but that's okay. We'll get our tungsten wire, we'll 0.03 diameter. Hopefully you have 0.02 just because it's easier to work with. And kind of measure it, and we're gonna coil it, so we're gonna use a little more than just straight up. So I'd say about this much. Always cut a little more than you think you're actually gonna use, and it's okay if you because once you cut it, it's done. And if you cut more than you should, that's okay, you could just cut it back off. But if you cut less than you should, it's kind of, you have to restart. So you get these smaller ones, they're a little sharper, kind of just gotta cut them. And snap. Put these back. Alright, so let's move on to coiling our tungsten filament. So what you want to do is kind of give a little leeway once we put, or you got to get a thermocouple, and that's how we'll wrap it around. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. And make a little T, give it a few inches of leeway, and what we're going to do is just kind of wrap it around like this. Make sure it's nice and tight. And we'll do around maybe 5 or 6 coils. And just slide it off. So now we have our coiled filament. What we're going to do is just kind of put it over here. We know that it's going to have to come up like this. Bend it. You can bend it back here. And we're going to cut this part off right here. So now we have our coiled filament that we're going to put in there. Okay, so now that we have our copper rods prepared, our tungsten filament prepared, we got to put it in. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start out with one copper rod. Make sure it's the right end I'm putting in. We're just going to put that in. We're going to have about like a little inch or two, just so that when we put in the tungsten filament, it's not touching the walls. We're just going to try and get that tungsten filament in the hole. This is definitely the most tedious part. Once we get it, we're gonna keep it there, get our pliers, kind of just clamp the end. What we're doing is, so essentially we're putting it in the hole, right? And then once it's in there, we're clamping it down so it's not able to move anymore. Just do that a couple times, make sure you get it real good. And I think I got it. So it's not moving. We have one of our tungsten filament. It's okay, we gotta bend it back. We want it to be a little more straight. So now we can get the other one in on the other side. It's usually a little easier. And do the same thing. Get that in the rod hole. We're gonna get our pliers. Just gonna clamp it down. Hopefully that worked. And we got our tungsten filament. So now we have to put on the we have to secure the copper rods with the reactor head. And the way we're going to do this is with some swage locks. Now the copper rods are a little thicker than just our reduced ends on these tungsten filaments. So what we have is we have these reducers, if it focuses, that have little D's on them. That means we drilled the hole right here to be a little bigger so that the copper rods can fit through, and that's what we want to use. We got a D right here, a little hard to see, but I'll mark them again so that it's easier to see. So what we do is we put a large nut, put the back ferrule, now the front ferrule. And we're going to get our reducer, put that on, our drilled reducer. And we're not going to worry too much about the placement of the filament yet, just because we could still change that. And now we have to get a smaller nut. So we have it sealed around the glass. Now we want to get it sealed around the copper. So we'll put on our front ferrule, always facing towards the reducer. Now our back ferrule. Now we're gonna kind of make sure it's in a decent place, the filament. Now we want the filament to be kind of straight. I don't know if we could see that, straight down the middle, just so our flares can be right above it. If you can visualize that, because we're gonna have, here, I'll get the flare. We're gonna have the flare like this. We're gonna have a little down more. And we want that to be right above, and we want our filament to essentially be vertical. So we'll get, this seems like about a good location for it. Now we'll just put the back nut on to secure the rod in place. Moved around a little bit. Let's make sure that's good. Just secure that rod in place. Now we're going to do the same thing for the other side. We're going to get our big nut. Our back ferrule. Or front ferrule somewhere. Find it, but that's okay. We'll just grab another one. Put our front ferrule facing the reducer. We'll put in our drilled reducer with the D on it. And we don't have to worry too much about the placement yet because we haven't secured the copper rod. Just screw this on. There we go. And now how to ferrule something like that. Now we'll put the front ferrule on our copper rod. And now the back ferrule. And now this is where we're gonna pay attention to where our filament goes. So we're just gonna put this on, kind of push it a little bit. We'll twist both of them just to make sure it's in the center. Generally, doesn't have to be exactly in the center, but as close as you can get. Kind of hold it in place, make sure it's in the center. Just screw it on like that. Oh, turn it a little bit. So now we have our reactor head with our tungsten filament. It's down the middle. Try and get that as best as you can. The copper rods. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually be setting up in our ring stand. Get some room over here. We're going to lower this down just so you can see. You want to get a ring stand that's about diameter so that your bottom reactor head, or not the bottom of the reactor fits kind of snug. And that's what we're aiming for. Now before we do anything, get some gloves. We want to put some vacuum grease around this so that we can create a seal. And this is the vacuum grease. Get a glove with just a little bit on your pinky, about that much. Always start out with less than you think you'll use. And we're just gonna put this around the inside of the reactor head on this opaque part. Just around. You could always use a little more if you need. I think I'm gonna use just a little bit more. About that much more. Make sure it's fully covered, like that. We're gonna take off my glove. Grab the top of our reactor head, stick it on, and just twist it to make sure. Oh, you're gonna feel some resistance, and that's definitely what we want. Now we want it to be that so I can hold it like this without the bottom falling. And if you feel that it's still falling, just use more grease and you should be fine. So now we have this set up, and forgot to mention one thing, but over here, this is, oh, you can't see that. There is some more. This is going to be the inlet of our nitrogen, so we got to put a connector on it, a reducer. So same deal, we have a back nut, and I already have the ferrules in there. It's going to come out. So back ferrule, front ferrule, facing towards the reducer. We'll put the reducer back on, and we can screw on our gas tube now. Nitrogen gas tube. And there we go. Now we're going to take our very top of the reactor head where we have the flare and the gas connectors. We're going to attach that. We're going to get one of these clamps, just open it, attach it, and you could screw this down. Oh man, hold on. You cannot see that. We do. Lower this some more. So we're gonna have this up on here. Don't worry about the positioning too much yet. We're just trying to get it attached. So we'll put one of these clamps on. These clamps you can screw tight. Now just adjust our flare to be right above the filament. We're gonna lower it just a little bit, just so it's almost touching the filament, but it's not. Bring that up so you can see. That's kind of how we want it, right above the filament, just so as much gas touches that filament as possible. That's our main goal. Bring it back up. And we got to put our exhaust on now. Now with the exhaust, we don't want it coming through here, we just want it coming out here. So what we're gonna do, and you'll see why once I set up the gas lines. So we're just gonna put a cap on it. We put a big nut on there, back ferrule, front ferrule. We get our reducer, put that on there, and just screw it on. Make sure it's nice and tight. And what we'll do is get our cap, put our cap on. I'll raise this up so you guys can see better. we're gonna attach this right here. You're gonna get one of these smaller clamps, clip it, clamp that on there. Let's see. I actually messed up a little bit. I should have this facing towards the rod, and you'll see why once I set up the reactor. So we're just gonna make sure that's nice and steady there. Okay. Oh, and I don't know if that saw, but we want the outlet gas stream of my you can see it better. So we're gonna have hydrogen, methane coming through there, going right above the filament. You can see copper rods, our outlet, and we want this inlet for our high nitrogen facing towards the pole, and you'll see why. Alright, so here we have the reactor. I'm gonna set it up right here and adjust the height to make sure our exhaust is going into this pipe, which is sort of like a vacuum, so it's gonna take any leftover methane, any carbon that comes out, any hydrogen that's going through, because those are all flammable gases, and it's pretty dangerous if we just have them floating around. What I did here to secure this is I placed a clamp. I clamped it in and make sure that our flare stays put and that this isn't very wobbly, and that's the top of your reactor head. So right now we have to hook up our gas lines, and we have to hook up our power source. So make sure you follow the gas line, make sure you know which is which. I have it set up right now that methane and nitrogen are going through rotometers. You should learn what those are, how they work. And I have hydrogen through the needle valve again. Learn that, learn how it works. And that allows us to alter the flow rates of methane and hydrogen individually, as well as nitrogen, so we can get different ratios of methane to hydrogen. What you should do is you should calibrate those rotometers before you start this experiment, just so that you know at what reading the rotometer gives what flow rate for methane and for nitrogen gas. So here I have my methane line, and we have a swage lock. We have the ferrules right there and the nut. And we're just gonna put that on top right here and screw that in. Make sure it's nice and tight. Again, triple check your lines, make sure you know which is which. I know this one's hydrogen, so we're gonna get our hydrogen, put this in the side right here. I hope it's a little clear why we put these female to female ends right here, just because we can't hook up this directly to our T-joint. But now we have a way to combine our gases and manipulate the flow rate. Now we have to put in our purge gas stream. Get that. Sorry. We're just gonna turn that a little bit. Purge gas. Ferrule is in first. Now we can screw it on. There we go. So now we have all our gas streams hooked up. Now what we need to do is hook up our electrodes. Our electrodes can be found right here. You see there's white and black. One's positive, one's negative. It doesn't really matter which you put, we just need current. So what we're going to do is going to hook this up right here, clamp it right here, and now we can supply power to our system, heat up the gas and get carbon. And we need to do one more thing. We need to come over here and get a multimeter so that we can read the voltage drop across our filament, because that's important for our experiment. And they're clamped ones, so you just clamp it on, one on each end. Let's see if we can get. So what I like to do is I like to just kind of prop it up right here. Clip one right here. And let's see. Clip the other one right over here. And now our system is fully set up. You can start running gas through. Make sure you always purge the system with nitrogen before. Make sure you reduce the tungsten filament with hydrogen afterwards. And hope everything goes well. I hope you're able to make progress with this experiment. Alright, so I actually forgot to mention one thing about this experiment that you should do. It's putting on the camera. So this is the camera. It's essentially an electronic microscope. You hook it up to the laptop with this through the USB, and there's an application, I believe it's called GCPD camera or something like that, and that's how you access it. Now hopefully by the time you're working on this experiment, this camera already has the lenses on. We have 1 lens, 2 lenses, 3 lenses, and that's just to lower the saturation that it's going to get when you turn on the hot filament. And so the way we're going to hook this up is we're just going to get a clamp, put a clamp on, turn this a little bit, and we're just going to clamp the camera in place so that it's facing the filament. And I'll let you figure out what the best way to do the filament is, but this is how you do it, with the clamp and the camera. So now officially you're ready to start the experiment. Make sure you triple check your gas lines, and that's about it. Good luck, and hopefully the research goes well.